My name is Rowan Keller, and the last time I shook my father's hand, he was smiling at her. It was a quiet smile, the kind men wear when they're about to win something they never deserved. She stood next to him, one hand on the armrest of his leather chair, the other holding a glass of water she just handed him like a nurse. But she wasn't his nurse. She was my wife. Her name is Celia. We were married for 5 years. No kids, no real fights. Just long silences that started showing up more often in the last 18 months. The kind of silences that don't feel like rest. They feel like waiting. She started spending more time with my father after his second stroke. He didn't like hospitals, said the smell made him feel like he was already gone. So she offered to help. Small things at first, driving him to appointments, organizing his meds. He said she had a calmness about her, said she reminded him of my mother. I should have seen it. But you never expect your wife to look at your father like that, and you never expect your father to look back. I grew up in a house where silence wasn't empty, it was sharp. My mother died when I was 12. After that, Dad spoke less, corrected more. Praise came in glances, affection in spreadsheets. We weren't close, but we were clear. He raised me to be practical, controlled, unsentimental. So when he asked Celia to move into the guest house after his second fall, I said yes. It made sense. She was organized, patient, familiar. I was at work most of the day anyway, and it was just easier to let her handle it. That's what I told myself. The first real warning came on a Thursday night. I got home late, around 9:30. The kitchen lights were still on. I expected to find her reading or folding laundry. Instead, I walked in and saw her at the dining table with him. His glass of scotch, her glass of wine, jazz playing low on the Bluetooth speaker. They were laughing, the kind of laugh that comes at the end of a private joke. She turned when she heard me walk in. Didn't flinch, didn't scramble, just smiled. "Hey, you're home." That's what she said, like I was the guest, like I'd interrupted something. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, and then I walked past them and went upstairs. Later that night, she climbed into bed beside me like nothing happened. Told me he was feeling better, that he'd asked to talk about the will, said it was just logistics, that he trusted her to explain things in a way that didn't stress him out. I nodded, didn't press, didn't ask, because part of me believed her, and part of me didn't want to know. Over the next few weeks, things changed, but quietly. My father stopped calling me. When I visited, she always answered the door first. He'd be in the den, robe tied loose, glass in hand, watching golf with the sound off. And she'd be seated beside him, flipping through estate documents like a loyal secretary. He used to trust me with those things. I was the executor of his first will. I'd helped him set up the trust. But now, every time I asked if he needed help, he waved me off. "Celia's got it handled," he'd say. "She's a sharp one." The week before his third stroke, I came home early from work. Something had been gnawing at me. Something about the way she stopped touching me at night. The way she started referring to "your father" instead of "Dad." So I came home unannounced, walked through the front door, and there, in the hallway, I heard her voice. Not angry, not afraid, warm, familiar. "Do you want me to bring the blue folder tonight, or are we doing that in the morning?" His voice replied, slower, but clear. "Tonight. You always remember the details." Silence. Then the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then a laugh, hers. I didn't go in. I stood there for a long moment. Then I backed out. Quietly. Sat in my car for half an hour. No music, no calls. just the hum of the engine. I told myself maybe it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, that my father was old and she was kind, and that didn't mean anything. I let myself believe that, until he died. When the will was read, I was calm. I expected changes. He'd mentioned them vaguely in the last few months, but nothing prepared me for what I heard. Everything, every asset, every account, transferred directly to Celia. Not just his properties, not just his stocks, but the house, the land, the offshore trust we set up together. All of it. My name appeared once. A watch, the one he wore on the day I graduated. No one looked at me. Not the lawyer, not Celia. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, in a black dress that didn't quite look somber. The room was silent, and so was I. Because grief feels like drowning, but betrayal, that feels like drowning, and realizing the hand pulling you under has your last name. They held the reception after the will reading. Catered, tasteful, nothing too dramatic, just wine, quiet jazz, and people in black outfits pretending they didn't notice. Celia floated through the room like she belonged to it, like she had always belonged. Hugging my father's lawyer, nodding gently at old family friends, not a single tear. My uncle came over, touched my shoulder. Your father trusted her, Rowan. That's all this is. Don't make it something else. I didn't reply, because by that point I had already started recording. I went home that night, technically her home now. She had changed the locks, but left a spare on the porch. Of course you should be able to stay, she said, as if I were a guest stranded by rain. Her voice was light, like someone comforting a child who hadn't won the prize. I walked in and the air was different. Cooler, cleaner, as if everything that had ever belonged to me had been gently wiped down and replaced. My childhood photo was gone from the mantel. In its place, a framed letter, my father's handwriting, addressed to her. Something about trust, about gratitude, about a connection I didn't expect in this final season of my life. She made tea that night, sat across from me at the kitchen island, and talked like we were old colleagues. She said she hadn't planned for any of this. That grief creates strange bonds, that my father had filled a space I couldn't reach. Then she said it, quietly, like confession. He understood me better than you did. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. Didn't speak, didn't blink, because I had nothing to say to that. Not yet. 2 days later, the first changes appeared in public record. The trust was restructured. The holding company that owned the vineyard land was renamed. The beneficiaries of the primary estate fund were updated. All of it happened within 48 hours of the funeral, which means it had all been prepared before my father died. Signed, filed, notarized. She didn't grieve, she executed. That's when I started digging, not for closure, not for pity, for proof. Because grief fades. But betrayal, if you let it sit long enough, becomes architecture. And I was ready to build. The first place I checked was the guest house. She hadn't been in there since the funeral. It still smelled like him. Cologne and paper. Old wool blankets and untouched medicine. In the drawer beside his bed, I found a notebook. The same kind he always kept. Leather-bound, small, meticulous. He used them for estate planning ideas, to-do lists, sometimes letters he never mailed. On the first page, a sketch of new trust arrangements. On the second, her name circled 3 times. Then this. Celia says she'll take care of it. No one needs to know just yet. No one needs to know. I kept reading, flipping through dates, tracking handwriting. There were notes about asset transfers, passwords, scheduled meetings. Her handwriting showed up once, directions in the margin about which forms to notarize together. This wasn't just companionship, this was collaboration. But the most important page was at the very back. Scrawled quickly, like he didn't want to think too hard. He'll never forgive me, but she says he'll land on his feet. He always does. I'm tired of fighting everyone. She makes things easier. It wasn't guilt, it was resignation. He'd given up trying to reach me, and she was the easiest way out. That night I pulled out our prenup for the first time in years. Not hers and mine, his and hers, my father's. 'Cause after my mother died, he'd quietly remarried. It didn't last. But the documents were filed, and when that marriage ended, the attorneys added an appendix. A clause. One he never removed. A clause that voided all family trust disbursements to any future spouse or partner who engaged in undisclosed romantic conduct with another family member. It was designed to block gold diggers, but he never removed it, even after he gave her everything. The best part, he referenced the prenup in the new trust paperwork, which made it legally binding. Celia hadn't read it, or she assumed it didn't apply, or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, it was a mistake, because now everything she'd just inherited was vulnerable. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient, because betrayal doesn't break you. Not if you know how to hold still long enough. And I'd been holding still for years. Families don't lie with words. They lie with silence. And mine had mastered it. The days after the funeral were full of check-ins. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years sent polite texts. Aunt Miriam mailed a sympathy card that smelled like her living room. Dust, mint, and regret. But no one mentioned the will. No one asked how I was. And no one seemed surprised that Celia now lived in my father's house. Without me. That's when I realized this wasn't a shock to them. It was a secret they'd already accepted. I called my sister. Rachel had always been the buffer in our family. Soft-voiced. Careful. She used to say, "Don't pour gasoline just because someone lit a match." When she picked up, she sounded rehearsed. "Hey, Rowan, I was just about to call." "Were you?" Silence, then. This doesn't have to be a war. It's just complicated. That's the word cowards use instead of betrayal. Complicated. I asked her if she knew, if she'd known about Celia and Dad. She didn't deny it, didn't stutter, just sighed like I was being dramatic. "It wasn't like that," she said. "They weren't physical, if that's what you're asking. It was emotional. They just connected. He was lonely. And I wasn't. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said nothing, because by then I understood the game. They weren't covering for her. They were covering for themselves. I started checking timestamps, security logs, camera backups. Celia had been visiting my father late into the night, months before she officially moved into the guest house. Her car, her key card, her name on caretaker expense forms, signed by my father, but processed by Rachel. They weren't just witnesses, they were participants. I traced a paper trail of silence. One night I drove to the estate. Not the main house, her house now, but the caretaker's shed in the back, where old documents were boxed and stored. Inside, I found the original trust documents, filed, scanned, and reprinted, but sloppily. One version had my name as primary heir. Another, dated 2 months before the funeral, had hers. But both referenced the same clause. The same fatal line in my father's prenuptial appendix. In the event of undisclosed romantic involvement between any listed beneficiary and a direct family member. Said beneficiary shall forfeit claim to all trust-controlled assets. It was like a live wire buried beneath polished wood. She hadn't just overlooked it. She had built her entire theft on top of it. The next morning, I met with Dad's attorney. He greeted me like a man greeting a mirror, measured, distant. "Rowan," he said, "I assume this isn't just a courtesy visit." I handed him the clause. He blinked once, then again, took off his glasses. "This was never revoked?" "No." "And you believe Celia's involvement with your father qualifies as—" "Ask her how long she's been wearing his watch." He didn't smile, but he stopped blinking. In the weeks that followed, I filed the quiet paperwork. No threats, no confrontation, just filings, objections, notices. A motion to review the trust under Clause 6C of the original family agreement. Request for court-supervised valuation, and a sealed deposition list, including Rachel. I didn't tell anyone, not even my friends. Because revenge doesn't shout. It waits. Celia still smiled at me at memorial events, still called me Ro in front of family, like she owned history. Still wore black like it meant something. She thought I was grieving. She thought I'd accepted it. She didn't know I had already opened the next chapter and placed her name at the very top of the list. There's something cruel about watching a thief decorate a house they don't realize they're about to lose. Celia had changed the curtains, painted the hallway a soft gray, added books to the shelf that my father never read, titles with words like legacy, intention, power. She walked through his house like it had always been hers, as if the inheritance was a reward for good behavior, as if the lies she told had no expiration date. But she forgot something. A clause, not buried, not hidden, just ignored. The court didn't contact her directly at first. They contacted the trust's legal custodian, asked for records, timelines, digital trails. The inquiry was sealed, silent. But silence is a strange kind of knock. You don't hear it, you feel it. And eventually, she started to feel it. She called me, first time in weeks, said she wanted to clear the air, said she didn't want things to become ugly. That's the word people use when they know they've been caught. Ugly. I told her we could meet in the garden. Neutral ground, a place my father once called quiet enough to think. She showed up in black slacks, crisp blouse like a business casual widow, still wearing his watch, still using his name like it gave her permission. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I haven't done anything yet," I answered. She sat down, crossed her legs slowly, waited for me to blink first. "I know this is painful, Rowan, but I was there when he needed someone. That wasn't betrayal. That was love." I looked at her, then looked at the house. "Was that before or after you signed the first property transfer?" She didn't answer, because she couldn't remember which version of the story she was telling. I slid a piece of paper across the garden table. Not a threat, not a letter, just a copy of the clause. All beneficiaries engaging in romantic conduct with a direct family member forfeit claim to estate-controlled assets. Her eyes moved across the lines, slower than usual. Then she exhaled through her nose. "Your father knew about that clause. He did. He didn't care. He didn't. But you do." I didn't reply, because the answer was obvious. She stood up before I could say anything else. "You always needed to win," she said. "No," I said. "I just stopped letting you." Then I watched her walk back toward a house that was slipping through her fingers with every step. Within a week, the court sent notice of a pending freeze, not full asset seizure. Not yet. just enough to block further transfer, enough to make the foundation shake. She couldn't sell, couldn't borrow, couldn't leverage equity. Suddenly, she started calling people, family, friends, even Rachel, trying to explain something she no longer controlled. And then she made a mistake, a big one. She contacted one of the trust advisors directly, left a voicemail, trying to clarify her timeline with my father. But she said too much, admitted the relationship started months before the legal transition. That's all the court needed. Because once it became documented that she misrepresented the relationship, everything she touched became questionable, fraudulent, revocable. The judge granted a temporary injunction. I got the notice first. Celia got it the next morning, hand-delivered. I didn't have to be there. But I drove past the house anyway, watched as she opened the envelope on the porch. Her face stayed blank for a few seconds too long, like she couldn't read what was happening, or didn't believe it. She called me again that night, voicemail only. You don't understand what this does to me, Rowan. What this makes me look like. That was the last message she left, because she still thought this was about how she looked. But I wasn't punishing her. I was just reminding her what she signed. My father taught me never to raise my voice in a negotiation. Silence, he said, is the only power they can't accuse you of misusing. So I stayed silent and let the clause do the talking. When the injunction went through, no one called me to ask why. They called to ask how I could, not her. Me. As if betrayal had a statute of limitations, as if I'd waited too long to be hurt. Rachel left a voicemail first. 3 minutes of layered disappointment. She said Celia was already grieving, and that I was reopening wounds. I didn't reply, because the wounds had never closed. They'd just been wallpapered over in blackened sympathy and forged signatures. Aunt Miriam called next, said it was a family matter, and that lawyers were a bit extreme. I asked her if she remembered what my mother's voice sounded like. She hung up. Then came the visit. 3 cars, 4 relatives, and Celia. They showed up on a Saturday morning, parked on the edge of my driveway like a line of patient judges. She walked up the path first, dressed simple, hair down, hands folded like an apology. She asked if we could speak alone. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. You made your point, she said, but this is affecting more than just me now. She said we a lot after that. We're hurting. We just want peace. We can fix this. I let her talk, didn't interrupt, because I wanted to hear it all, not the words, the desperation underneath. She wasn't used to being on defense. She still thought she had allies. When she was done, I asked one question. Did you ever love him? She paused. Too long. Then, I respected him. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer, because she didn't have one. Not for me, not for herself. That night, the family texts started coming faster. Paragraphs, accusations, things like, "You're tarnishing his name. Celia was there when you weren't. Maybe if you'd been closer to your father, this wouldn't have happened." That was the one that broke through. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was honest. They'd all believed it. That I deserved less because I'd stayed distant. That my grief didn't qualify. That her presence made her worthy, even if it came in through the wrong door. But here's the thing. They didn't choose her because they loved her. They chose her because it was easier than admitting what he'd done. Because to call it betrayal would mean reckoning with their silence, their complicity, and none of them were ready for that. So I stopped trying to be the son, stopped trying to be the brother, the good man, The quiet one, the he'll move on type. I leaned into what they feared. Precision, legal, documented, unemotional. Because if they were going to treat me like the villain, I'd write the ending myself. 3 days after that visit, the court issued an order to unseal communications. Any documents, messages, or financial transfers between Celia and my father within 6 months of the will change were now subject to review. She tried to fight it, said it was invasive. The judge didn't blink. Because once you tie your name to someone's trust, your secrets don't belong to you anymore. The emails were bad, not romantic, not explicit. Worse, they were strategic. We don't have to tell Rowan yet. He'll only make it complicated. Once the transfer is finalized, we'll make space for him somewhere. He'll adapt. He always does. I trust you. It's your legacy now, not his. That last one wasn't hers. It was his. I printed that email and kept it. Not for the court, not for leverage, for myself. Because I needed to remember. This wasn't just a wife who strayed. This wasn't just a father who failed. This was a room full of people who watched it happen and handed her a key. She held the house like it was proof of her place, of her version of the story, of everything she thought she'd earned. She changed the locks, repainted the walls, had his initials stitched into the throw pillows and called it a tribute. People came by to visit her now, old family friends, former business partners, even a few from church, people who never called when he was alive. And she welcomed them like a widow, gracious, grieving, performing. She poured wine in the dining room I grew up in, lit candles in front of photographs I took. She believed the house made her untouchable. But the house had always been a shield, not a crown, and it was never hers. My father never updated the title. He had plans to. He drafted paperwork, spoke to the trust attorneys. But he never finished the process. He died with the land still tied to the original trust. And because of the clause she ignored, the trust was unraveling from the inside. She didn't know that. Not at first. It started with a letter from the court, explaining that the title was now under dispute, that she could not legally sell, rent, refinance, or alter the property until further notice. She called me, finally. First time in weeks. "You're freezing me out of my own house," she said. Voice sharp. Less performance now, more panic. I didn't correct her, 'cause she wasn't wrong. She was just mistaken about who owned what. The judge issued the formal injunction days later. Everything tied to the house, utilities, insurance, even the deed, was placed under temporary hold. She filed a complaint, filed again, tried to argue that the clause was morally irrelevant. But the court didn't care about morality. They cared about documents. And the documents said she breached her eligibility the moment she crossed the line. Emotionally, romantically, legally. She argued she was the executor of his wishes. The court reminded her she was a disqualified party under the revised clause. Her face in the hearing was the first time I'd seen her expression slip. Not rage, not guilt, just confusion. As if the world was shifting under her and she didn't know where the floor had gone. By the end of the month, the financial institutions followed suit. Accounts were locked, distributions paused, access codes revoked. She still had the furniture, still had the art, but she couldn't touch the value. She lived inside the shell of an empire she no longer controlled, and she knew I had done it quietly. No press, no spectacle, just procedure. It wasn't revenge. It was a reminder. I visited once just to see it. Not to gloat, not to speak. just a look. She opened the door before I rang the bell. No smile, no greeting. Just stood there in silence, framed by the home she couldn't sell. "Are you proud of this?" she asked. "No." "Then why?" "Because you thought it would last." She looked tired, worn around the eyes, still polished, still in control, but thinner now, like the performance was costing her more than she expected. I stepped back. "You should start packing," I said. "Where would I go?" "You had a plan for everything. I assume this was one of them." She didn't speak again, didn't ask for help, didn't cry. She just closed the door, slower than she opened it. And for the first time in months, the house felt quiet again. Not peaceful, but empty. Like it was finally letting go of the wrong name. The court finalized it in spring. Clean ruling. No appeals. Her claim was invalidated. The assets returned to the trust. And the house, my father's house, was reassigned to me as sole beneficiary. I didn't throw a party, didn't post about it, didn't call anyone. I just stood outside the gates one morning, key in hand, and waited for the silence to feel like mine again. Celia was gone by then. No goodbye, no letter, no final scene, just absence. She left the furniture, the linens, the curated bookshelf he never read. Left the garden she'd half finished, and the framed emails she once used as decoration. There was a wine glass on the porch railing, half full. Dust on the rim. She must have meant to finish it. I didn't rush back into the house. I walked the perimeter first. Past the lemon tree we planted when I was 11. Past the stone bench where my mother used to sit with a notebook and no words. Past the gate that never quite latched. Everything was smaller than I remembered. Everything except the feeling. Inside, it still smelled like her. Like lavender cleaner and the perfume she wore to funerals. I walked past the living room, down the hallway, stopped in front of the study door. I hadn't opened it since the day after the funeral. It was exactly the same. Chair slightly turned. Papers in a stack no one ever disturbed. On the desk, a photograph. Me, age 15, holding a trophy I didn't want. My father beside me. His hand on my shoulder, smile thin but visible. She hadn't moved it. Maybe she didn't notice it. Maybe she left it on purpose. I sat in his chair, not to feel close to him, not to grieve, just to see what it felt like. It felt quiet, not cold, not heavy, just done. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred takes effort. So does love. Eventually, you run out of both. All that was left was clarity. She wanted comfort. He wanted escape. And I became the cost they both accepted. They didn't do it to destroy me. They just didn't care if I got destroyed. That was always the truth. I filed one last motion. Not to sue, not to punish, just to correct the record. The trust would be renamed, no longer bearing his initials, no longer held in that false language of legacy. It would carry one name now. Mine. Not out of pride, but precision. I don't visit the house often. I lease it to a quiet couple now. They don't ask questions. They tend the garden. They keep the lemon tree alive. Sometimes when I drive past it on my way home, I catch myself slowing down, not out of nostalgia, just habit, like checking a scar long after it's healed. People still talk. The family's quieter now, but I hear things. They say I was cold. They say I should have let it go, that I overreacted. But none of them were there the day I realized my grief had been negotiated behind my back. None of them heard her voice when she told me he understood her better. None of them watched their own history get signed away in someone else's handwriting. So no, I don't need their understanding. I kept the one thing they didn't expect me to use, the documents. You don't need to scream to get justice. Sometimes all it takes is reading what they didn't, and waiting long enough to turn silence into sentence.